The following is a Hoop Ball presentation. Welcome to the Fantasy NBA Today podcast.
What's happening, everybody? Welcome to Fantasy NBA Today, a Hoop Ball presentation. I have all these little things that I like to talk about at beginnings of shows, but they're boring. So we're going to skip over them on today's pod. We'll get to them at some point later on and just go right into the fact that another one of our good buddies has carved out time for us, the great Matt Smith from BasketballMonster. He was part of our industry mock from a couple weeks back. He was more than willing to talk about all of his picks, which after scouring them, I probably would be too. There's some good ones in there. He is at SManSports on Twitter. Matt, a pleasure as always. Thanks for coming back on.
Dan, thanks for having me. I thought you were going to say, speaking of boring, here's Matt Smith, and introduce me that way. But no, very, very nicely played.
No, I like to be as gracious as possible, but I have said that, I am a boring fantasy player, which is sort of weird that I ended up with a podcast because I love all these old guys that are getting underrated this year. I love, there is nothing about me and fantasy basketball that isn't super boring. So if you're on my podcast, you're sort of boring by association, and maybe you can spice us up a little bit today. How you been otherwise? What's going on? The ramp up to the season is upon us.
It is. What are we, about 3 weeks away? So, yeah, been a crazy time over at BasketballMonster. Josh and Kyle have been smashing out the projections for the last couple of months. I've been doing a ton of writing on my positional tiers. We did a sleepers bust and breakout article, which every site does. Wrote a categorical scarcity article a couple of weeks ago, so that's been well received. And yeah, just about to finish off my drafts and legs, and yeah, get ready for the season.
Crazy! It's awesome. It's crazy, but it's awesome. How can people access some of this cool stuff you're talking about?
Yeah, so in terms of my content, sign up to be a Basketball Monster member, and then, hit me up on Twitter at SManSports. I try to get to as many questions as I can there and like to interact with people. So, yeah, if you want to come and say hello or send me a question, do so there.
Isn't it interesting? Twitter really boggles my mind, and you have like 6 times as many people following you as I do, so I don't think I'm even at that threshold yet. But to go from... for me, I was a minor league baseball broadcaster for a decade, and I had a Twitter following of about 450 dedicated minor league baseball people. My interactions were extremely limited, and generally me talking about, bowel issues that I often have. I'm a delicate flower. And then within, 4 months of getting involved with hoop ball, just getting involved with the fantasy basketball world, it was a deluge. It's amazing to be on the other side of that wall, to be on the question receiving side. You don't realize how many people are in these sitting in their desk chairs just stressing every day about these decisions until you get all of those Twitter questions. Isn't it amazing?
Well, the thing is, I do that too. I stress during the draft, who am I going to pick? I stress looking at the waiver wire, who am I going to pick up? So the problems that you and everybody else have are the same problems that I have, and I'm sure Aaron Bruschi has, and everybody else. So we're all in the same boat.
It's pretty sweet. We're happy to help. He is at SManSports on Twitter. Hit him up. He is Matt Smith of BasketballMonster. Let's talk mock draft. Matt was kind enough to take part in our industry mock. I was, and I've said this before, this is actually the first time I organized one of these, and I totally biffed it in a couple of ways. I didn't do the settings right at the outset, but I think everybody was pretty good about adjusting their outlook. And it seems like pretty much everybody drafted for a 9-cat roto with maybe a couple of very minor exceptions. Your team, especially here at the beginning, just looking at the first few picks, pretty well stacked. But I'm going to bug you about each and every one of them. We're going to go through the list. We're going to talk about where you got guys and why, and just pick your brain a little bit. You ready to roll?
Let's do it.
Beautiful. Round 1, pick 6, which is, I think, a pretty good spot to be in because you're guaranteed one of those top 6 behemoths, and the one that fell to you was Kevin Durant. I feel like, it's KD or Jokic at that point, right? In a 9-cat, and don't you kind of have to go KD for the the unlimited upside?
Yeah, well, I actually would have taken Kevin Durant at number 3 if I had that pick.
Yeah.
At the time, we didn't know about the whole Jimmy Butler trade thing, so probably now would take Karl Anthony Towns, and he did go number 3 in this draft. But yeah, I had Kevin Durant as my 3rd or 4th pick. So for him to fall at 6 behind Giannis and Steph Curry, just one of the most perfect rotisserie players in the game. And this year in particular, I think you need to treat him as a big man with those blocks in particular. We've got him projected for around 1.4, 1.5 per game. We know his efficiency is through the roof. And also then he gives you 4 and 5 assists as well. So he's just that perfect player to build your team around.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. Not too many power forwards out there shooting about 89% at the free throw line on medium to high volume either. It's remarkable to me, and I feel like, Matt, maybe it's a short-term memory thing. Have people forgotten that KD on a per-game basis was about 25% better than anyone else in the league 2 seasons ago? Like, how quickly can people forget that?
Yeah, well, things changed pretty quickly. We saw Anthony Davis, a season and 2 seasons ago becoming that player that people didn't want to touch because he was injury-prone and he was always leaving the game to go to the locker room, and now he's the undisputed number 1 player this season. And yeah, like you said, with Kevin Durant, had some injuries last year, so maybe that's put people off in head-to-head leagues. There's that rest risk towards the end of the season. But yeah, for rotisserie leagues and including 9-cat with turnovers, he doesn't turn the ball over as much as someone like a James Harden either. So yeah, I've got no problem with him being a solid top 5 player again this season.
Right there with you. Number 19, pick in the second round, Drew Holiday. He had an unreal season last year. Are you at all concerned? And I love Drew Holiday. I got him in the 6th round in one of my leagues last season. I felt like that was probably the moment where things turned for me. He's going relatively early. How high can he go, maybe, is the question for Drew. Is there any worry that playing alongside Peyton instead of Rondo, could that hurt him? Or, I mean, is this just a guy who figured it out and he's ready to roll now?
Yeah, I think he's ready to roll again. Probably with Mirotic and Holiday, Mirotic and Julius Randle, there'll be a bit of ball go through those guys. But in terms of efficiency from a point guard, shooting guard, really wanted to lock down those assists as well. So he went behind John Wall, Kyrie Irving and Chris Paul. I did take him in front of Eric Bledsoe and someone like Kyle Lowry. But yeah, in terms of locking down those assists, the efficiency, and once again, lowish turnovers, which are important in this format. I think he'll be inside that top 20 again this season.
Yeah, crazy to get almost a block a game out of your point guard or shooting guard, wherever they put him. And he was, by the way, he played 81 games last year, so by totals in 9-cat, he was a first-round value at number 11. So not at all a crazy spot to get him at 19. Dude's just kicking butt and taking names. Yep. 3rd round, Devin Booker. I think this was this before we had heard about the hand surgery, or was this after? I can't remember.
Yeah, I was trying to think back as well. I'm not 100% sure, but if it was, maybe that's why he was falling. I guess that add the turnovers in as well, he'd probably drop him maybe 8 or 10 spots. But I feel at this point I've kind of looked after my turnovers enough with Durant and Holiday with the first 2 that maybe I was able to take a little bit of a hit there in that turnover category to get the high scoring, to get the strong free throw percentage. And again, I'm building on assists with maybe 5 or 6 assists from that extra guard spot. So yeah, I like the combination of those 3 guys, mainly with Kevin Durant up the top, using him as that big player, offering 1.5 blocks per game.
Just looking at as a police helicopter goes over the building, that's unexpected and a little terrifying. I don't know. I'm about to find out. Apparently, maybe I walked out of the supermarket with a little juice box or something. So let me ask you something after we get through these first 3 rounds. You had the 6th pick, which left you a pretty good... to me, that's one of my favorite spots because you are guaranteed one of those ultra monsters in the 1st round, and it puts you in a spot in the 2nd round where you're not stuck with kind of a weird clump of guys towards the end of the 2nd, beginning of the 3rd. Are you with me on this one? Or because I talked to Seth Klein recently, and he said he actually really likes being at the turn. He loves being able to just take 2 guys back to back and then not have to worry about trying to gauge what everybody else is doing for a while. I kind of like this middle chunk Like, you're getting your hands on a really good group of guys because you got to go early enough in the second round where you weren't stuck with the dregs. The third round, you weren't stuck sort of digging into that 36 to 40 group. To me, this felt like a really nice spot. Did you get that feel for number 6?
Yeah, I did. And in general, I actually do like picking at the turn, and in particular this season at the end of the first round, there's just so much value there with Damian Lillard, Russell Westbrook's falling into the early teens, LeBron James, Paul George, Victor Oladipo. You can take Ben Simmons there at the turn as well. So I really like that range. But in that midsection of the first round where you've got guys like Karl Anthony Towns, Nikola Jokic, Steph Curry, Kevin Durant, it just opens up all your options in that second and third round. And in particular, looking in that middle to late second round with all those point guards like Kyrie Irving, Devin Booker, Drew Holiday, Eric Bledsoe, Kemba Walker. If you do go Kevin Durant, Towns, Jokic, even Giannis early, then you can pick up that excellent guard on the way back.
So the one thing I have noticed about your team to this point is that you got yourself a power forward, you got yourself a point guard, and you got yourself a shooting guard, but you don't have a center yet, which everybody goes totally bonkers if they don't have a point guard and a center after the first 2 rounds. How do you tell somebody? Okay, let me rephrase that question, because I think best player available is generally the way you should be going. Where do you start to worry about not having a center?
Well, in the next round, I did take a center power forward option, but like I said before, with Kevin Durant offering those 1.5 blocks per game, that was really key and why I would have taken him over a Nikola Jokic, and probably even a Karl Anthony Towns at that point. And if you want to go off track for a minute, Dan,
sure, yeah.
Just in terms of rotisserie leagues this year in particular, and looking at shot blocking big men and efficient big men at that. This season over at BasketballMonster, of the 17 players we've got leading in blocks per game, only 3 of those players, 3 of the 17, provide a positive free throw percent impact, and that's Davis, Miles Turner, and Kevin Durant. Now, if we expand and open up that a little bit further, we can include guys like Jaren Jackson Jr., Jarrett Allen, Joel Embiid, Giannis, and Lopez. So that's only 8 players who we're looking at who are going to be elite in shot blocks, and also in your free throw percentages. And if you don't get pick 1, you're not getting Anthony Davis as well. So there's 7 guys. So the player pool is really, really shallow. So this might be the year in a rotisserie league where you have to take a Howard, a Drummond, a Capella, and try to get that free throw percentage back up because it's just so scarce this year.
That is spot on. Round number 4, I think that takes us into this pick. You got a center, John Collins at 43. I was just talking, by the way, we talked to Josh Lloyd. Matt and I recording this show the same day as recording with Josh. They will obviously air on different days. And he was mentioning that, and I'll bring this question up with you as well. Collins went at 43, and Jarrett Allen went right behind you to another one of your buddies from Basketball Monster, Kyle McCune. The thing that worries me is these were guys that were 3 months ago, they were sleepers. And then 2 months ago, they were like snoozers. And then last month, they were basically getting out of bed. And now it feels like they've had a cup of coffee and they're wide awake. At what point do you feel like we've eliminated the value on guys like this? And by the way, I'll tell you here so you're not like getting surprised. I'm not trying to do any gotcha stuff. Josh was saying he felt like there still was some with Collins, but Jarrett Allen at 44, you might have sort of eliminated a little bit.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree. Just going to look back and see where Miles Turner went in this draft as well, because he's the other one, and he went at pick 29. So I think that's right around his ceiling. He could potentially be a top 25 player, but that's best case scenario. So looking in round 3 when we had Andre Drummond, Clint Capella, Miles Turner, Draymond Green, LaMarcus Aldridge, Pau Gasol, all these bigs go off the board. Then Al Horford, DeAndre Ayton went to Josh at pick 39, so I really needed a center. And then we had Nikola Jokic come off the board as well.
Yeah, that was me.
John Collins. Yeah, that was you. Jarrett Allen. So we had that big men run in rounds 3 and 4. And like I said, because big men are just so difficult to find. So John Collins at 43, I still think there's a little bit of meat on the bone there. Could be a top 40 player. Jarrett Allen could be, but I don't like it as much. I just worry about how much playing time he will get there in Brooklyn. But yeah, like I've said, if you're going to get an efficient shot blocking big, you have to get them early.
Yeah, seems so. Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you as well. Jumping into round 5 at pick number 54, Jamal Murray, a guy who took a step last year, and to his credit, I mean, he was a guy that I was a little bit down on last season. I didn't know if all the different categories were going to come together. Some bodies went down in Denver, and Jamal stepped through that door in a big, big way. He has a weird fantasy profile, though, right? Because, not a ton on the defensive side, just ultra-elite free throw shooting, pretty efficient overall. Where do we think he goes from last year to this year? Does the logjam worry you at all, or does he have another gear that we haven't even seen yet?
The signing of Isaiah Thomas is a little bit of concern. I don't think Thomas will eat too much into Murray's playing time, but it might potentially impact a jump that we were hoping to see again this season. But I think at pick 54, I probably had him in that 40 to 50 range. So this was someone who's fallen outside the top 50, who I think can be a comfortable top 50 player in this format. Like you said, the excellent efficiency from a point guard, shooting guard player, okay scoring, okay rebounds, okay assists. So it doesn't really hurt me anywhere. So just a solid across the board player with some nice value at this range.
Round 6 at pick number 67, Lauri Markkanen. I think, if I'm not mistaken, he's listed as a forward in this, but I think he has center eligibility, right? And that would be a nice spot to get someone who can kind of give you odd statistics for a center, right? In hitting some threes and also being decent at the free throw line.
Yeah, and that was the 2 key points at this point was his out of position 3, so around 2 per game. Maybe I could have taken Nikola Mirotic as well when he fell down into the next round. Markkanen's not quite going to be at a steal and a block per game, but yeah, as you mentioned, the really good efficiency from the free throw line, not too bad from the field, around 45-46% possibly. So yeah, just another solid player. Suited my team, suited what I needed to do position-wise as well. And then when we get to the next pick, you'll see I took a small hit in free throw percentage because up until this point I had looked after it.
And that next player you mentioned is Jusuf Nurkic, who I was talking about on a mailbag show on the 26th, I think, of September, where he felt like a guy who went... I think the term, I guess, is post-hype, where he had that giant month to end the 2016-17 season. He went real early this most recent season and generally disappointed people, and now it almost feels like the pendulum has swung far enough back the other way, where you use the expression meat on the bone. It feels like the meat has been sort of placed back on the bone for Nurkic. This isn't a bad spot to take a chance on a guy like that. What if he figures it out? He has the ability... We've seen it for a month to a month and a half to be a top 30, top 35 kind of guy. The question is, can he keep it going all year?
Yeah, exactly. And he was one of those players who I took in the top 50 last season, hoping he could hold that form for the duration of the season. It wasn't to happen. But at this point, when rebounds and blocks again are scarce, at pick, what was it, 70-something, I think. I've just
78.
lost my team.
78,
Pick 78. Once again, if he can put it all together, and he's still only young, he's still only like 23 or 24 years of age as well, so there's still some upside there in Jusuf Nurkic and could bounce back and have a top 50 or top 60 season.
Jabari Parker at 91, the next pick in a high-octane Chicago offense. Why are people so down on Jabari Parker? Is it the giant injuries? Because when he was, I'm going to use this term a bit, we'll go hyperbolic, but when he was alive before that last ACL tear, he was dominating, right? I mean, he was really good at the beginning of the previous season. If there's any chance we get that Jabari in Chicago, that guy was putting up pretty good fantasy numbers.
Yeah, and I guess he's not an overly sexy pick, so that's why people tend to shy away from him. I like him better in a roto format that are doing a head-to-head because he just provides solid across-the-board production. He doesn't give you that big boost in any one category, which I think you need in a head-to-head format. But finding 17, 18 points per game at this point, over a 3, maybe a steal per game, pretty good efficiency-wise at around 48 and mid-70s from the free throw line. So, once again, just a solid rotisserie player. He projects pretty well. I know Kyle's massive on Jabari Parker this season and loves him.
Sniped him. You sniped him. Kyle drafting right after you, and he actually did mention that when we talked to him, because we got to that part of the podcast, and again, I still don't know what order all of these shows are going to air in, but I'll tell everybody, if they haven't heard the Kyle McCune show yet, we got to this part of the show, and he was like, Dan, what are your thoughts on Jabari Parker? Because clearly he wanted him, and he didn't get him, so he went a different direction at this spot. Jonathan Isaac went next off the board. But he's big on Parker, and I like what Chicago's trying to do. They're going street ball style out there, and that just means there's gonna be fantasy stats. Guys are gonna go get points. It doesn't matter if the team sucks a butt. That sort of that's inconsequential.
And Josh, Kyle, and I have done so many drafts, mock and real, together in the last 3 weeks. We know who each other likes and who they're going to pick, and maybe that was part of it as well. Kyle was right behind me there at 92, and I knew he wasn't coming back to me, so had to snap him up then and there.
Admitting on the podcast that you were out to get him. That's nice.
Yep.
Rudy Gay at 102. This is an interesting one. I actually was really high on Rudy Gay right at the start of the offseason. Then when I found out they were getting DeMar DeRozan back in that Kawhi deal, I was a little bit less high on him. But, he's a guy that played well coming off of serious injury. Kind of feels like a little bit of an upside pick here. Like, what if it doesn't work out? Big deal. You can cast him off into the ocean if you have to. But what if it does? What if it does, right?
What if it does? And I got him at pick 102. Could be a top 80 player if it does work out, and just another guy perfect for the rotisserie game, a steal and a blocker game, solid efficiency. Once again, good points, sort of 15, 16 a game potentially. Solid rebounds from a small forward, power forward player as well. So, a bit of upside there, low risk as well.
Bogdanovic at 115. This draft was definitely before we heard the news that he had needed a procedure and would be out for 6 weeks. What were your thoughts before hearing that news? So let's pretend for a minute like we don't think he's injured right now.
Yeah, so I'm a big Bogdanovic fan. We hyped him up last year in his rookie season, and he had a really, really good year when he came across to Sacramento. I'm a Phoenix Suns fan, so he was on our roster for a while before he traded him. But just a guy at this point where you can get maybe 3 to 4 rebounds, 3 to 4 assists per game, a couple of threes, a steal. He had some huge games at times last year, scoring in the 20 points and 4 or 5 threes per game. The Sacramento Kings backcourt and wing situation in terms of the small forward is pretty bare. So De'Aaron Fox, Buddy Hield and Bogdanovic are going to be playing a ton of minutes. And outside the top 100, I've actually drafted Bogdan in probably 3 or 4 leagues as well as this mock. So I've got a number of shares in him. And the injury now is a little bit of a concern, but rather it happen now and get that surgery out the way than halfway during the season.
I think I had forgotten that you were a Phoenix Suns fan. Does this season make you feel optimistic, pessimistic, or neither? Since they sort of brought in some older guys finally and got a first overall pick and all that stuff. Are they on the way up finally?
I hope so, Dan. And they can't get any worse. Put it that way.
That is true. They're a tough watch.
I'm a big Luka Doncic fan, so I'm still a little bit salty that the Suns took DeAndre Ayton over Doncic. But right now, we got to get behind the team and behind DeAndre Ayton and hope he is going to be that star center and the star player next to Devin Booker. The Trevor Ariza signing's interesting. I like the veteran leadership. Fills a need at the 3 and the 4. And then we'll see what some of these younger guys in Josh Jackson and Mikal Bridges and even Dragon Bender. I don't think he'll play a lot this season. He had a really poor summer league, but the talent's there. So we'll see under a new coach if they can finally put it all together and start moving up the standings.
The one of the other reasons that I bring this up is that the very next round, Trevor Ariza came off the board right before your pick. That was Kyle, grabbing him at 125. Do you think he's going to have a decent year? Because I feel like he's getting underrated this season.
Yeah, I do. The same. And steals and threes in particular are 2 categories that you can get late. and you can get them from your small forwards, and I've done that with my next pick in a minute. But Trevor Ariza is a guy that can hit a couple of threes and still provide 1.5 steals per game. Going to play a lot of minutes at the 3 and the 4, as I said. So, he's falling outside the top 100, and really like him at that spot.
Well, your very next pick, and I'm sure I'm going to biff the pronunciation on it every time. Is it Shidi Osman?
Something like that.
Yeah, I can't settle on something. I've gone to like Turkish pronunciation websites, and I still can't get full agreement from these things, and it's driving me bonkers. Anyway, it's Osman for the purpose of this podcast. It's Osman. Tell me about that one.
Yeah, well, obviously no LeBron James there in Cleveland anymore. At this point in time, I don't think that's re-signed Rodney Hood either, but I still like Osman at this pick outside the 120. Could play a lot of minutes there on the wing. I can bring up some stats from last year if you want to give me a couple of minutes in terms of what he did in X amount of minutes. But once again, some steals and threes, solid rebounds. And probably one of my big sleepers for this season.
So I'm on a Reddit page right now, and they say it's Jetty Osman. So that's, I guess, what we're going to go with. We're going with Jetty Osman. I don't know.
Yep.
That's what I'm rolling with, folks, and you're stuck with it now. Dennis Schroeder at 139. Is this a play on Westbrook being hurt, a full season play, or tell me more about Dennis, because I've never been a big Schroeder fan. Yeah,
so once again, I can't remember whether this must have been just after the Russell Westbrook knee surgery.
I think so, yeah.
Whether Westbrook does miss some time either at the start of the season or in the early part of the season and his timetable gets pushed back, Dennis Schroeder would step straight into that starting point guard role, and potentially if he's playing 32, 33 minutes a night, could provide top 60 sort of production. And even if Westbrook does start off the season, there's no Andre Roberson there at shooting guard, so I think Schroeder's still going to have a role within the mid-20s, playing with and behind Russell Westbrook. So probably more of a pick to get my team off to a bit of a hot start, hopefully. And if Westbrook's rolling and Schroeder goes back to 20 minutes, bang, drop him and pick up another hot free agent.
I like that strategy. And I think it gets underrepresented in fantasy circles, and that is basically not every one of your picks has to be a full season value for your team. Sometimes there is something. We used to have a young fella named Zane Donani who worked over here at Hoop Ball. He's moved on to sort of bigger and brighter things. I think he might work in the NBA now. Who, when he came on the podcast, he would talk about having basically a revolving roster spot at the end of his bench where he only wanted to pick up the hottest guy that he knew was only going to be hot for like 6 games max. Just revolving door of whatever dude was putting up like top 75 numbers for a week. And that's fine, because if you can do that 5 to 10 times a year and turn that roster slot into 80 games of top 60 value, that's better than having a late round guy for 80 games. Is that kind of what you're subscribing to here with the Dennis Schroeder pick?
Yeah, exactly. And particularly when we're drafting, 3, 4, 5, 6 weeks out from the start of the season, I'm a big believer in whoever the highest upside guy is on the waiver, just pick them up and stash them. At the moment, it would be someone like Tyus Jones or Gorgui Dieng. We don't know what's going to happen with the Jimmy Butler trade and where he's going to go and who's going to be moved. But if Tyus Jones does end up in Phoenix as the starting point guard, or somehow they move Jeff Teague and he's the starting point guard in Minnesota, he could be a top 100, top 80 player. So why not just stash him now and see what happens? And we know going back, probably even 3 or 4 years ago when Gorgui Dieng was, a top 50 fantasy player. So I know he's been out of the rotation and he's been in the rotation, but on limited minutes behind Karl Anthony Towns. But he's still got an elite fantasy game for a big man. So stash those guys, stash Dennis Schroeder in case, Westbrook's timetable gets pushed back, and wait and see. You can hold them for 3 weeks and cut them the day before the season starts if need be.
Talking to Matt Smith of Basketball Monster at S-Man Sports on Twitter. Matt, are fantasy basketball analysts the only people on earth who want to see more Gorgui Dieng?
I think so.
Yeah, I feel like we're on a raft with that one. James Johnson at 150. You have a lot of really nice picks in this draft, and this one might actually be my favorite. I said at the outset that I love old dudes getting underrated, and he's coming off a really poor season. We've heard all this stuff about injuries. I'm not sure I buy it. I think he might just kind of be an old guy now. But at 150, to get a guy that can do as many things as he can, what a steal. Nicely done.
Well, he had that sports hernia last season, so he was playing in a fair amount of pain and some suffering. So apparently, all okay this off-season, feeling fit and healthy. He's put up top 80 value only a couple of seasons ago, can flirt with a steal, 3 and block per game. Still should have a fairly nice role there in that front court with Hassan Whiteside and Kelly Olynyk. So, yeah, at this point, bit of a swing for the fences. Once again, not overly sexy. I'm not taking a gamble on the rookie, but yeah, once again, if it doesn't pay out, we can move on pretty quickly.
Sure can. And so I think I know I got stuck hanging on to him probably longer than I should last year, just because we've sort of seen it. But I mean, round 13, pick 150. That's a wonderful spot to be able to get a guy that we've seen post value of basically half of that. I mean, you got him at 150, and he could, in a right situation, be a top 75 kind of guy. So I see almost no downside to that one. And then your round 14 pick, also a solid one. Again, it's sort of an if it pans out type of scenario, but you got Trey Burke at 163. If he wins that point guard job, and again, I mean, let's remember who he's competing with in New York. So there's a decent shot he can win that battle. He went nuts last year. I don't think we can expect him to shoot 50% with a lot of jump shots again, but he put up big numbers for that last month and change.
Yeah, well, over the past the All-Star break in 27 minutes per game, he put up 16 points, nearly 6 assists, 0.9 steal, and 1.33. So, if he can do something similar, whether that's starting or whether that's playing in a 6-man role off the bench, I've got so much Trey Burke on my team at the moment. It's a little bit scary, but with numbers like that and finding someone who can hand out 5 or 6 assists at this point of the draft is almost impossible. So that's why I'm giving Trey Burke a shot, and we'll see if it's a home run or not.
So on kind of an overall scheme thing for this draft, not necessarily how your own team went, what were some of the, I guess, more of the broad takeaways where, I mean, we saw that round 3, round 4 center rush. We saw kind of the rooks coming off a little bit later. What were the things that you kind of took note of? Interesting things that you could use in a future draft as you do your prep, or even try to gauge what players might come off leading up to your pick?
Yeah, well, so that round 3-4 big men run is absolutely key. A couple of seasons ago, it was the point guard run in round 3. Now it's the big men run. So if you're in a rotisserie league, want to have a high free throw percentage plus being good and strong in blocks, you really need to go early on one of those guys. Assists is the other thing. Super difficult to find a lead assist outside the top 50. Once you get probably past Chris Dunn and then maybe Nicholas Batum with those 5 or 6 per game, very, very difficult to find assists and steals. In particular from that small forward position with like your Trevor Ariza, Mario Hezonja, Joe Ingles, Kyle Anderson, those sort of guys in the mid-round, you can find them quite easy. And threes, as always, are the easiest category to find later in drafts and off the waiver wire. So that's a very brief snapshot around categorical scarcity.
Do you take any, because threes are a lot easier to find these days, do you take that into account when you're setting up your early round selections, or is that something that comes more into play in the middle rounds where kind of everybody is good at making threes in the first couple of rounds, basically? So you sort of, I don't know, you can kind of ignore it if you want to, but as you get into rounds 4, 5, 6, 7, that range, then you start to be able to, I think, pick between categories, and it sounds like, Matt, in talking to you, when you get to that middle area, you sort of shy away from them a tiny bit and then steer back towards them later. Am I catching that right?
Yeah, spot on. So, and that's a reason why I've never been a big Klay Thompson fan, people drafting him in the 3rd, 4th round, because yes, he's efficient and yes, he hits a ton of threes, but you're missing out on so many rebounds, assists, steals and blocks in those early rounds. And so, yeah, it doesn't mean I'm shying away from a James Harden or a Steph Curry early. Those guys are great and going to give you a great foundation in threes, and then you can just top up on that later on. So I'm all about getting rebounds and blocks and assists early, and then the steals and threes later on in the draft, and really rounding out your team.
Yeah, it seems like you'd have to work pretty hard to avoid getting 3-pointers in the first 15 picks, right? You can't really steer away from them.
Yeah, and that's why people are maybe shying away from Ben Simmons, because they say, oh, he doesn't offer any threes and his free throw percentage is terrible. But if you were to actually pair him with Damian Lillard, your free throw percentage is sitting at about 80%, and you're still right back in the game in three. So, just because you take Ben Simmons doesn't mean in head-to-head you have to punt that category, or in a rotisserie league you're going to be bottom of the standings, because you can make that category up so easy later on. So, just a important note to write down on your piece of paper or your spreadsheet or whatever you use come draft time. But do as many mocks as you can. Have a look at our mock, see where players went, make those notes.
I have a couple more quick thoughts for you, and then I'll let you go, Matt. Just noting here, the guys Matt brought up, Klay Thompson. He went at 37 in this league. The 4 guys that went in front and behind him: Draymond Green, LaMarcus Aldridge, Kyle Lowry, Marc Gasol, then Klay Thompson, and after him, Al Horford, DeAndre Ayton, DeAndre Jordan, and Nick Vucevic. All centers with the exception of Kyle Lowry. Crazy, right?
Yeah.
That's nuts.
That's that big man run. So, whether it's you've gone guard early and then you need to get a center, or if you do take Davis, Towns, Giannis, Durant, Joel Embiid early, and then you need another backup. Either way, those centers are going inside the first 4 rounds.
That's really something. Okay, draft day. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it's not to say that you can't find them later. Then you're going to have to rely on someone like a Yusuf Nurkic or a Brook Lopez. Who was the other one? I was just thinking of a Julius Randle who won't provide blocks. But Brook Lopez was the other one. If you do need blocks and some free throw percentage later, Brook Lopez is probably the one to target there.
You mentioned draft day. That's going to be my last topic with you here. We're talking again to Matt Smith of Basketball Monster at SManSports on Twitter. Easy to find. You didn't give people a complicated last name to spell like some moron on this podcast. What do you do, actually, to get yourself situated for draft day? My ritual is very simple. I only like to have one tab open on the computer that I'm drafting. I don't want to flip around. I got to watch the window, see what everybody's doing. If I want to pull up stats, I put my laptop next to my desktop PC and do all the other stuff on that other monitor, and then one handwritten sheet of names of guys that are either I'm avoiding or taking, and you cross them off with a pen as you go through it. What's your move?
I'm still old school. I still like the pen and paper.
Love it.
So I write down every single pick, so whether it's 13, 16, 41, 44, whatever it might be, and then I'll write probably anywhere between 4 to 6 names next to each of those picks of players who I can target, and that sort of forms a bit of a guide and an overview of where you think you can get not only players but positions as well. So like I said, maybe you have to go point guards and bigs early, and then you get your wings later on. And I also like to use my positional tiers and rankings and have them listed and cross them off as I go. A lot of my leagues are moving to slow drafts these days, so it is a lot easier to analyse picks when they come up. But for the couple of live drafts I still do go through, cross off players as they go off the board. So planning and preparation is key.
Slow drafts are nice because you've got fantasy NBA players across the globe. Hence, I mean, you could use this podcast as an example. You're 17 hours ahead of me, I believe. What's the middle of Thursday like? No, I'm not going to. That's a stupid question. But it is. It's nice. Good.
Jimmy Butler hasn't been traded yet in the future.
Thank you for that. That's good. Indulge me in my idiocy. I lost my train of thought for a minute there, but talking about the magical future, I think that this move to slow drafts, you lose a little something, right? I like live drafts. I like the pressure because I think if you're adequately prepared, you can actually use it to your advantage a little bit.
Correct. Yeah, there's nothing like sitting there at the beginning of a live draft waiting for that timer to tick down, and then it's to go, and then you've got, whether it's 30, 60, 90 seconds on the clock to make that pick, and the pressure that comes with it, and the pressure you can put on other players by as soon as your pick comes and you know who you want to pick, you go bang, you don't even think about it, and then it gives the guy behind you less time to think as well. So there is nothing like a live draft and auction drafts in particular, which are just crazy. And we've got our auction draft for our Dynasty League in 3 or 4 days' time, which is going to take hours, but it's a ton of fun. But when we've got players all around the world, it looks like slow drafts are the way to go, and that's the way the industry's moving.
Yep, you know what? I'm okay with it because it does sort of open up the fantasy landscape to more people, more fun. But if there's a way to try to get that live draft, there is this weird little, like, magical couple-hour window in the late afternoon here on the Pacific coast of the United States, where it's the early morning where you are in the... Yep. Technically, is that still considered the South Pacific? I don't know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it's early afternoon here, and over in Europe, it's probably really early. It's probably 4 or 5 a.m. So
so they get screwed.
Some of those guys could get up early to draft.
I think Europe probably gets.
It is possible.
I think Europe probably gets boned in this scenario the most. But you've got you got left and right on the U.S. You've got Australia, New Zealand, Philippines, a lot of folks out there that takes care of all of us. Great Britain, you could probably still squeeze it in, like, right before bed. The folks that get nailed is, like, Eastern Europe. So if you're in, Yugoslavia or the former Yugoslavia, you're probably in trouble, and you probably want a slow draft. So, sorry. In terms of the draft day, just last question on that front. You mentioned the pen and paper. I find that the pen and paper is helpful for one real key reason for me, and it keeps me from staring too hard at the Yahoo or Fantrax or ESPN window ADP list, because that can really throw you off if you get caught up in their rankings. And there's something, like, psychologically, I think, that moves you as you see players in a particular order. So if you're just going off a different list, you don't have that weird psychological barrier.
Yeah. And that's why I like keeping Yahoo or the ESPN rankings the same on my draft board, even though they're not the rankings that I'm working off of, because I like seeing what everybody else is seeing. And if Jamal Murray, like in this instance, fell in this draft, if he's fallen, then I know that he's at the top of the board. And there's always that one player who drops down the list, and eventually someone's going to take him because he has been sitting there for a while, but it's still not the right pick to take. Do your homework, do your preparation, make notes on pen and paper with pen and paper, do it on a spreadsheet or however, the kids do it these days, and print out all their documents and formulas and whatever. But just back in your homework, back in your strategy, and all the best for your coming drafts.
And there you go. He is Matt Smith, the Basketball Monster. He is at SManSports on Twitter. Matt, as always, an absolute pleasure. Thank you for carving out the time again, and good luck with the ramp up to the season. It's a great time of year.
Yeah, thanks, Dan. Thanks for having me on, and all the best for hoop ball this season.
Fantastic. Likewise to Basketball Monster. Again, he is Matt Smith. One massive thank you as Matt heads off, and we rumble right along into the next part of our program. We skipped all the logistical stuff at the beginning, so now is the time we get to slip that in. Of course, we have a coupon attached to every guest appearance here on Fantasy NBA Today. For Matt Smith, it is S-MAN, S-M-A-N. That is S like Smith, M-A-N. I mean, I don't know that that's what that originated as, but that's how I'm spelling it for you here on the podcast. S-M-A-N. You get $3 off the draft guide, which today, ladies and gentlemen, has the B150 inside of it. Oh, yes, the Brewski 150, the thing you've been waiting for weeks, for months, basically since you got the last B150. It is in the draft guide today, October the 1st, and anybody making a purchase at Hoopball, draft guide, season pass, B150, whatever it may be, is entered automatically into a drawing for a Hoopball t-shirt. That's part of the fun as well. All you got to do is buy something today and you get in on that drawing. If there's a lot of people that buy stuff, your odds go down. If very few people buy stuff, your odds go up. We're not changing the prize. It's a hoop ball t-shirt, and that's coming up for anybody who buys something today. I would recommend doing it with a $3 coupon code SMAN. Please, if you have a moment, take a second to rate and review the podcast. We always appreciate that. And more than anything else, please subscribe to the show, especially if you're new to the podcast. Subscribe to the show. That's how we move up the rankings boards. That's how more people can find us. That's how we can continue to get better. Personally, I think get better over here. It's how we can continue to provide as much free content as we do here at Hoop Ball. It's how we can keep this podcast free forever. We get subscribers. We get advertisers. We get free pod. We can continue to expand guest lists, all the things that come with sort of having a little bit more clout. That's how we do that, with you subscribing and rating and reviewing the podcast. But we're not done for the day, folks. We're not done. We got 2 guests on today's podcast because last week at the tail end, the preseason began, and most of that stuff is hot garbage, but we did see one in particular, one little note that developed out of Philadelphia that we felt we needed to talk about. Well, you never know where news is going to break in the NBA. The season, of course, 365 days long these days. We do have preseason games, and the first big piece of information, the first shoe to drop, well, I guess you could say Lauri Markkanen's giant injury might have been the first large shoe to drop, but the second one was finding out that Markelle Fultz has been moved into the starting lineup for the 76ers, at least here in the preseason. And we thought we'd need to dig a little bit further on this one to figure out if this is going to be a long-term thing, what it means for the other guys on the club, what it means, obviously, for Fultz himself. And kind enough to carve out some time for us very quickly after the news broke is Lucas Johnson, a site expert at thesixersense.com. The Twitter handle is @SixerSense, and you can follow Lucas on Twitter at LucasJohnsonNBA. Lucas, my man, thank you so much.
Glad to be here. Thank you for having me on.
It is our pleasure. All right, so I think you heard already what we're starting with, and that's Fultz in the starting lineup, Redick to the bench. Is this a long-term thing? That's got to be my first question. Is this sustainable? Is this the plan going forward? What do we know?
Well, you got to look at this from several angles. First off, the Sixers selected Fultz first overall, so the eventual plan would be to move him into the starting lineup. That being said, there are a few obstacles in the way. Obviously, the major thing is Fultz's shot. Now, he's been working with shot guru Drew Hanlon this whole entire summer, and from the videos that I saw during their workouts, looking very good. Hanlon thinks that Fultz is going to do plenty of good things, and so does his teammates. So I suspect that we're going to see more this season from Fultz than what we saw last season. Now, is that to say that he'll reach what he did during his lone college season this year? Most likely not. Fultz has even admitted in the past that his shot's not 100% yet, and Coach Brett Brown's confirmed this. But when you look at it, it did look a lot better. He was even able to drain, I believe, around an 18-footer in the third quarter. And he was able to hit free throws as well during the game. So there is progress with the jump shot. Now, yet again, I think that with the jump shot, it will take time. And actually, several articles in the past I've written that I don't think Fultz should be thrusted into a starting role right away during the regular season. Now, I have seen things, from several writers, other writers, and from my understanding, and yet again, I've only done preliminary research on this because this is such a new topic, that there is I believe it was Rich Hoffman of The Athletic that reported that Brown suggested it is possible to see Fultz on opening day, though not guaranteed. So that's something that you have to watch out for. My guesstimation, though, personally, I would probably ease Fultz into that role. You don't want him to get what Drew Hanlon called the yips again, like he did last season, even though Fultz denied that he had the yips. But I would say that probably to begin the season, Fultz would probably start off on the bench, though. With Redick being 34 years old and a defensive liability, would not be surprised at some point during the season to see Fultz transition into a starting role and most likely replace Redick.
So how does that impact? Well, first of all, yeah, I think we can all agree that it was the yips. If your free throw stroke looks like Charles Barkley's golf swing, it's probably not a physical thing, and it's something that we can all root for as well, because the mental side of sports is finally now getting a little bit more coverage. But in terms of playing time, is this something that will drastically adjust that? I mean, was there a target that changes whether or not he's in the starting lineup, or is this more about kind of creating an extra playmaker, creating an opportunity for him to play with, I guess, what you'd certainly refer to as better allies on the floor with him? I mean, what's the goal of this move is what?
Well, I think obviously the main thing is you want to have two players that can create off the dribble. And last year you only really had Simmons being able to do that, but he was obviously limited based on the fact that he's unwilling to take a mid-range or a three-point shot. I think Fultz attempted 11 three-point shots all last season. So while he's been working on that this summer, he's even said himself that he's probably not going to extend his range or shoot a lot of three-point shots this season. So I think one of the main goals is because in the Boston Celtics series in the playoffs, you saw once they were able to stop Simmons on offense, the rest of the Sixers offense was basically hauled to a standstill because nobody else could create off the dribble. So Fultz is that one player on the roster currently that can create off the dribble, albeit similar to Simmons in that he can't really extend his range that much, though we saw in preseason that he's working on it. So expect him to be able to. And also you get another really good playmaker. Don't underestimate Fultz's playmaking ability. In college, even though he was scoring 20 points a game, I believe he was still averaging around 6 assists a game. So that's having two playmakers out on the floor would definitely give Sixers much more ability to create easier offense. Now, it does present a spacing issue. However, if Brett Brown's used to one thing, it's having spacing issues with his past less talented rosters. So fixing the spacing issues probably wouldn't be a huge deal for Brown off the top, in my opinion. I think it's just making sure that the Sixers offense has, and Markelle obviously offers more defensive versatility than Redick as well.
Do you see? Sorry to jump in there.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say, do you see? Because I'm looking at the Sixers roster up and down it, and I did this yesterday too. There isn't a ton of depth at the guard position unless you go to the really young guys. So it seems like there were sort of some minutes available, right? The departure of Marco Bellinelli, who ended up playing a pretty nice role for you guys after his acquisition last year. How does that break down from like a minutes perspective? Does this hurt Redick the most, TJ McConnell the most? Who is actually losing out for Markelle Fultz to be gaining minutes? And then we'll get into the specific numbers.
My guess would probably be most likely McConnell. Now, in the preseason and offseason, I had projected that I had suggested several times that the Sixers should have traded Jared Bayless. But in the first preseason game, you saw Bayless get a lot of minutes and even play the first 3 quarters before even McConnell got in there, which was surprising to me personally. Now, that could either mean one or two things. Either one, the Sixers are trying to integrate him with his three-point shooting into the rotation, especially with lack of shooting if you have Markelle and Ben out on the floor. But the other thing that they could be doing is very easily they could just be shopping Bayless as well, because they were unable to move him during the summer. $8 million is a lot to just buy out or stretch for 1 year. So maybe they're trying to look at alternative options of trying to bring up his stock. But yet again, as of now, it looks like TJ in this first preseason game, yet again, that could be contingent on Bayless's future. But based on this first preseason game, it looks like McConnell's the one that has hurt the most from Markelle getting minutes right now.
So in looking at then just opportunity, it doesn't seem, and maybe I'm misreading this. By the way, talking to Lucas Johnson here of thesixersense.com, at Lucas Johnson NBA on Twitter, at Sixersense on Twitter if you want to follow the website as well. Just from an opportunity standpoint, it seems like this is all fairly reasonable stuff. Like maybe there's a bit of an overreaction occurring because of the starting lineup announcement, but it sounds like, from what I'm hearing from you, Lucas, and tell me if I'm misreading this, obviously I could be, the plan was to get Fultz in there for a good chunk more minutes this season anyway, and try to take maybe a little bit of the day-to-day burden off of a guy like Redick, but they still need him in there to help space the floor at times as well. Am I reading that right?
I think that, yet again, this is my speculation. This is not me having sources or anything, but my speculation based off of what I have seen thus far this preseason, or is what I've seen around from other credible NBA sources, is that the idea of having maybe giving Redick more of a creator off the bench role, and maybe reserving his body for more of a against lesser opponents defensively would be a positive. But I think this is yet again more of a move for Markelle than it is for JJ. I think Markelle is just, I think they want to make, they gave up a lot to be able to move up 2 spots in the draft in order to get Markelle. So I think getting him at that spot was, so I think developing him and getting him more minutes. I think the plan was to get him more minutes regardless this season. Putting him into the starting lineup in the preseason might just be experimental for now, but I think eventually it should transition as long as his jump shot continues to progress at even a slow rate. But as long as it continues to progress, I wouldn't be surprised to see him in the starting lineup at some point this season.
Very cool. Quickly here, Lucas, want to bug you about the other guys on the team because, Fultz is in the spotlight right now, but a lot of pretty significant pieces for the Sixers, guys that certainly looking at them from a reality or a fantasy perspective, they're very impressive basketball players. Joel Embiid, Ben Simmons, somewhat unheralded, Robert Covington has been outstanding for the Sixers the last couple of seasons. Dario Saric seems to be coming into his own. Your quick thoughts on sort of where these guys go in terms of their own individual growth. What's the next step for Simmons? What's the next step for Embiid? Are there any threats to playing time for guys like Covington and Saric, or are they cemented in as the other pieces? What can we look for from everybody that really we haven't talked about so far?
Well, Simmons, he said that he's put in a lot of work on his jump shot this summer, and he's worked with his brother Liam. Yet again, but as I stated earlier, he said during media day that he's not going to be doing pull-up three-pointers. So I don't expect him to increase the three-point attempts by a lot this season. I would hope to see more of a mid-range game added to his game with all the work that he's done this summer, but he's even stated that he's never really had to have any type of jump shot in the past because of how physically dominant he was growing up. So this having incorporating a jump shot will be a slow process to his game, but obviously adding a jump shot and being able to finish stronger at the rim would be the next step in his development. Adding either one really. For Embiid, he stated that he wants to add more of a physical presence down low towards the basket, regardless if it's driving or posting up. He wants to, I believe he said after a workout, after a practice, that he either wants to have a dunk or a foul every time he goes up to the rim. So that could be a very interesting. He's worked on footwork. I've even seen some of the videos from Drew Hanlon, who also works with Embiid and Fultz. So he's worked on some footwork, as he stated. I think having better ball control would be the next logical step in his development, which he says he's been working on his footwork and handles, and being more aggressive at the rim would definitely be a positive in his game as well. I think the NBA kind of misses those old school centers in the sense of being able to bully down low. You don't really see many centers that can bully themselves down low, and I think if Embiid can incorporate that into his modern NBA center game, that would be terrific for the Sixers. For Covington, as we saw in the playoffs, if he's not spot up shooting threes, he's virtually held in check in a game, which we saw during the Celtics series. My hope would be is that, and I think we saw one or two dribble drives last night, but my hope would be is to see him attack off the dribble more, which is not something he's really been known for. But if he can add a dribble drive off of a hard closeout, that would obviously open up his game so much more offensively. Because then you won't have defenders overly closing out on him. Just it'll keep defenses off keel a little bit more. Sark is probably the most underrated Sixers player on the roster. Honestly, I think if he was on most other NBA teams, he would be a second option offensively. But based off of how the team's currently structured with the Sixers, I would say he's probably a fourth option. Fourth or fifth, honestly. It just depends on where you rank Redick and Markelle. Dario Sark's passing ability is very underrated because you don't really see it here. But if you watch and look at his stats from his European playing days, you'll see that he's a very good playmaker. Though the thought that he could go to the bench is there, but I personally wouldn't put him in the bench rotation. I think he would be much better served as a starter. Honestly, I don't think of Robert Covington and Dario Saric will lose their spots in the starting rotation. I think Redick would be the odd man out if Fultz proves his ability to be able to play with the starters. I think that Redick would be the odd man out based on defense because everybody knows how much Brett Brown loves defense overall. So Brett Brown will make spacing work if the defense is good enough. So that's where I believe the rest of the starters are.
What can Saric do moving forward kind of year over year? We saw him improve his scoring from the previous year to this most recent one. His field goal percentage came way up. Just from an efficiency standpoint, he was a much better player in his second NBA season. Where does he go from there? What's the next step for Dario?
It would have to be his defense. While he was, I would say, maybe a step below average defender, he was still a very solid defender overall. I would say that defensive, being able to move his quick feet, more lateral movement on defense would probably be a must for Dario, as well as his vertical ability as well, because he wasn't really too much of a shot blocking, presence down low last year. So I would say defensively would be his next major area of weakness that he should try to improve on this season coming up.
Outstanding. Lucas, my man, thank you so much for taking the time.
Glad to be here.
He is Lucas Johnson. He is at Lucas Johnson NBA on Twitter. Give him a follow. He's a co-site expert at thesixersense.com and at SixerSense on Twitter. And he's carving out time to talk to us here. Lucas, can we bug you again as the season gets underway and we start to see these things shake themselves out?
Certainly.
Beautiful. And yes, we will have 2 coupon codes on today's podcast. We got 2 guests. We got 2 coupons. Your code is Fultz, F-U-L-T-Z, if you want $3 off the draft guide. That is thanks to Lucas Johnson coming on the podcast. We got a second coupon code on today's show. Yeah, it's not how we plan things, but 2 guests, 2 codes. Thank you to both Matt Smith and Lucas Johnson for carving out the time for today's podcast. Quickly here before we sign off, the Lauri Markkanen thing, 1 to 2 months is a big freaking deal. It is good news for guys like Bobby Portis, for Wendell Carter, for Zach LaVine, for Chris Dunn, anyone that was relying on getting additional touches, for Jabari Parker. I don't want to leave any key names out of that mix. And it's enough for me, by the way. In a roto format, I'm not drafting Markkanen anymore. I hate having guys on my bench to start the year, especially if they could be on that bench for 4 to 6 weeks after the season starts. I mean, that's a really big blow for a guy who's not potentially a massive difference. I mean, we're talking about a good player, best case scenario, top 50, more reasonable case scenario, top 60, top 70. That's not a guy that I'm sitting on for 6 weeks before the draft, right? Like with Niko Mirotic last year, we hadn't drafted him yet. We had drafted him, Without Markkanen, we have not. With Mikko, we did, and then he got punched in the face. So we weren't going to go drop him because we spent a pick on that guy. But at this point now, we have the ability to alter the course of our draft. So I'm not drafting Markkanen. I give probably all my other Bulls about a quarter round bump because they'll be better for the 4 to 6 weeks he's out, but there's still 15-ish weeks of the season, of the head-to-head season of the Roto, whatever, where he'll be back. So it's not going to be that big of a bump for those dudes. It's just going to be nice for them to get a few extra shots right out of the gate. Probably improves their value for a month and a half and maybe even makes them a potential sell-high candidate if somebody's thinking, Markkanen's still 2 to 3 weeks out. That's when you got to do it. Don't try to sell those guys the day before Markkanen comes back. Nobody's going to buy that crap. I am Dan Bespris. Thanks so much for listening. I know, a long one today, but we had a lot of good stuff to cover. Again, thanks to Matt Smith and Lucas Johnson. Tomorrow on the podcast, we will continue our review of all of these teams in the mock draft. We got a bunch of pros coming up on this thing. We got Kyle McCune, we got Alex Rickleen, we got Ethan Noroff. It's good stuff. It's all lined up here on Fantasy NBA today, and you will get one of them on tomorrow's pod as well. Have a great Monday, everybody. We'll talk to you tomorrow.
This has been a Hoop Ball presentation.